He said it was a birthday trip, but when the car stopped in the middle of nowhere, he tossed her bag onto the dirt and drove away without a word. Just like that. A 74-year-old woman abandoned in the wild. No water, no shelter, no one coming. Then she found a cave, and inside something impossible. A dying lion, alone and broken. What happened next would shake everything we thought we knew about wild animals and about love itself. The car slowed as the road narrowed, the tires crunching over red gravel that stretched endlessly toward the rim of the Ngorongoro Highlands. Miriam sat in the passenger seat with her hands folded in her lap, her thin fingers resting on a small leather purse she had owned for decades. The air smelled of dry earth and sunburned grass. It reminded her of nothing she had known before, and yet something in her chest tightened, as if her body understood what her mind still refused to see. Her son, Daniel, did not look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on the road, jaw clenched, one hand tight around the steering wheel. He had told her this trip was a birthday gift. 74 years, he said, deserved something special, a chance to see the famous crater, the wildlife, the open sky. Miriam had smiled then, surprised and grateful. She had spent most of her retirement counting small expenses, choosing carefully between groceries and prescriptions, thinking about Medicare paperwork and how far her savings would stretch. A trip like this felt extravagant, almost unreal. The car stopped abruptly. Daniel turned off the engine. The sudden silence pressed against Miriam's ears. Without a word, he stepped out, walked to the trunk, and pulled out her overnight bag. It was old, the zipper slightly broken, the fabric faded from years of careful use. He dropped it on the ground beside the road as casually as one might set down a sack of grain. "Miriam," he said at last, not looking at her, "this is as far as I go." She waited for the rest of the sentence. It never came. "Daniel," her voice was soft, uncertain, "is this where we start the tour?" He exhaled sharply, the sound of a man already tired of a conversation he had rehearsed in his head. "You'll be fine. People come through here all the time. Someone will help you." "Help you!" The words hovered in the air, hollow and meaningless. She opened the door and stepped out. The heat hit her immediately, wrapping around her like a heavy blanket. The sun was high, unforgiving, bleaching the landscape into shades of red and gold. She turned back toward the car, confusion giving way to a slow, dawning fear. "You said there was a lodge," she whispered. "You said there would be water." Daniel finally met her eyes. For a fraction of a second something flickered there, guilt perhaps, or annoyance at being seen so clearly. Then it vanished. "I can't do this anymore," he said. "I've got my own life, my own bills. You know how expensive things are now? Insurance, rent, everything. I'm not your retirement plan." The words landed harder than the heat. Miriam felt them settle deep in her chest, heavier than any physical blow. She thought of the years she had spent raising him alone after his father died, of night shifts, of skipping meals so he could eat, of forms and signatures and quiet prayers that he would never know how close she had come to losing the house, or how often she had chosen his school books over her own medical care. "I never asked you to be," she said. He shut the trunk. "I'll leave the bag. That's all I can do." Then he got back into the car. Miriam stood frozen as the engine roared to life. The car pulled away, dust billowing up behind it, the red cloud swallowing the road and with it the last familiar shape in her world. She watched until there was nothing left to see. No headlights, no sound, just the wind moving through dry grass. She did not scream. She did not cry. At least not at first. Her legs trembled as she lowered herself onto the bag, the ground hot even through the thin fabric of her dress. Around her, the land stretched wide and indifferent. Somewhere far off, a bird cried out, sharp and lonely. Miriam realized she had never truly been alone before. Not like this. She opened her bag with slow, careful movements. Inside were a change of clothes, a small bottle of water already warm to the touch, a pack of plain biscuits she had brought just in case, and a faded photograph of her and Daniel when he was a boy, grinning with a gap-toothed smile, his arms slung around her shoulders. She stared at the picture until her vision blurred. At her age, people talked to her about safety, about planning, about life insurance policies and end-of-life decisions, about not becoming a burden. She had listened politely, filled out the forms, trusted that the world still had a place for her. Sitting there now, under a sun that offered no mercy, she understood how fragile those assumptions had always been. The heat intensified as the afternoon wore on. Miriam's throat grew dry, each swallow scraping like sand. She knew enough to understand the danger. Without shade or water, time became the enemy. She could not stay where she was. Using her bag as a walking stick, she pushed herself to her feet and began to move, one slow step at a time, toward a cluster of rocks she could see in the distance. They rose from the earth like broken teeth, promising shadow, if nothing else. As she walked, she thought of Daniel as a child, of the way he used to cling to her hand when crossing busy streets. She wondered when that hand had let go, or if it ever truly had, until now. By the time she reached the rocks, her head was spinning. She found a narrow opening between two large stones, just wide enough to crawl into. Inside, the air was cooler, the ground packed and dark. She leaned back against the rock wall, closing her eyes, grateful for the brief relief. That was when she heard the breathing. It was low, uneven, closer than it should have been. Miriam's eyes snapped open. As they adjusted to the dim light, she saw a shape lying just a few feet away. Tawny fur. A massive body stretched along the stone. One powerful leg twisted at an unnatural angle, metal glinting faintly where flesh met steel. A lion. Her heart stuttered, then raced. This was how it would end, she thought. Not with a hospital bed or quiet goodbyes, but here, in the dark, forgotten by her own son. The lion's chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. One amber eye opened, fixing on her with a gaze that was neither wild nor angry, but weary beyond measure. It did not move. It did not growl. In that moment, something inside Miriam shifted. Fear was there, sharp and undeniable. But beneath it lay another feeling, deeper and older. Recognition. Two beings, abandoned in the same stretch of earth, both left behind by those who no longer needed them. She did not run. She could not. She sat down slowly, her back against the stone, and met the lion's gaze in silence, unaware that this choice, this single refusal to turn away, was about to set in motion a story that would one day shock the world. The sun was unrelenting. It hung in the Ngorongoro sky like a punishment, baking the earth beneath until the dust crackled with every step. Miriam's sandals, already too thin for the cracked terrain, had all but given up. Her heels were bleeding. She didn't notice. The weight of abandonment presses differently on a person's soul. She wasn't walking to survive. She was walking to disappear. The shrubs became more scattered, the hills more jagged. Every now and then she paused, not to rest, but to listen, though for what she didn't know. A rescue? A voice calling her back? A sign her son had changed his mind and turned around? No. Deep down, she knew the answer. What she was really listening for was silence, the kind that tells you no one is coming. She was losing strength quickly. Dehydration gnawed at her temples. The baked wind licked her neck and filled her mouth with the taste of salt and dust. She had no GPS, no cell signal, no insurance for her fate. Just a battered tote bag, a bottle with 2 inches of warm water, and a crumpled photo of a boy who no longer called her Mom. That's when she saw it. A shallow rock formation jutted out from the base of a low ridge. It wasn't much, just a series of eroded stones, half collapsed by time. But the shadow it cast looked like an invitation. Miriam angled her aching legs toward it. As she came closer, she saw a crack between the slabs, just wide enough to slip through. Shade was shade. Even if it was a snake pit, she would take it. She ducked inside. The change in temperature hit her like a blessing. Cool air kissed her cheeks. Her breath slowed. She let herself slump against the stone wall, the rough surface pressing into her back like an anchor. Her eyelids drooped as her heart thumped against her ribs until she smelled it. Not rot, not dirt, something else. Musky, metallic, alive. Miriam froze. There, just a few feet away in the dusky half-light, lay a mass of fur and flesh. At first, it looked like a tangle of rags or a sack of old canvas tossed in the corner. But then it moved, barely. A long, ribbed side expanded and contracted with shallow breath. A low wheeze followed. Then she saw it clearly. A lion, a full-grown male, lying on his side like a fallen statue, his hind leg twisted at an unnatural angle. One paw was grotesquely swollen, the fur matted with dried blood. A length of wire, thin but cruel, bit deep into his joint. It was a snare, a poacher's trap. And it had done its work well. His once glorious mane was coated in dust, his mouth slightly ajar, tongue cracked with thirst. Miriam's hand reached to her mouth, covering an instinctive gasp. She knew lions. Everyone in East Africa did. You saw them in schoolbooks, on travel brochures, in glossy magazines about wild Africa vacations. But not like this. Not dying, not broken, not 3 feet away from your bare feet. And then he opened his eyes. Amber, rich, deep, and streaked with the Ioi kind of darkness no sunlight could burn through. His gaze was slow, deliberate. He didn't growl. He didn't bare his teeth. He didn't need to. The message was ancient and immediate. This is my end. But I see you. Miriam couldn't move. She was a 74-year-old woman in a cracked rock shelter with a dying apex predator. Every instinct, every story, every mother's warning whispered in her bones. Run. But she didn't. There was no fear, only a strange, overwhelming weight of recognition. She had seen those eyes before. In the mirror, most mornings, since the day her husband died and her son began turning cold. The same dull glint of someone who once mattered, who once ruled a life, now reduced to something discarded and irrelevant. She wanted to speak. But what do you say to a lion? She said nothing. Minutes passed. She lowered herself to the floor, her bones cracking in protest. The heat of the day still clung to her skin, but the cave offered quiet now, an unnatural hush, like the world was holding its breath. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small wax paper packet. Inside was her last cookie. She broke it in half. The snap echoed. The lion's eyes flicked toward the sound. His pupils narrowed, muscles tensed, what was left of them. Miriam didn't flinch. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she tossed the larger half in his direction. It landed inches from his nose. He sniffed, blinked, and after a long pause, reached out his tongue and licked it, then stopped. He didn't chew, didn't eat, just let it rest there, like a memory too old to enjoy again. Miriam watched him. He wasn't hungry. Hunger had passed. What was left in this animal wasn't a need for food, it was a resistance to giving up. She took her half of the cookie and bit it. Her throat ached as it crumbled inside her mouth. She chewed slowly, never taking her eyes off him. The lion blinked again. That was it. Just a blink. But somehow it felt like permission. The cave accepted both of them now. Outside, the wind had started to pick up again. Red dust swirled across the ridge, painting the horizon with fading light. Somewhere, jackals barked. A hyena's call echoed faintly in the distance. The day was ending. Inside the cave, an elderly woman and a dying lion sat across from each other, bound not by instinct or fear, but by something even rarer: mutual recognition. Neither expected the other to save them. Neither asked. But in the strange language of silence, an agreement was made. You won't hurt me. I won't leave you. In the far corners of the internet, stories like these rarely trend. There are no headlines, no trending hashtags. But in moments like this, in forgotten corners of the world, something more powerful than virality takes root. A connection. One based not on data or convenience, but on presence. Real, raw, undeniable presence. As nightfall claimed the land and the shadows bled deeper into the stone, Miriam reached out one trembling hand. She didn't touch him, only laid it down, palm open, facing his side. And there, in the stillness of the Ngorongoro dusk, her fingers caught the rhythm of his breath. Slow, shallow, steady. A heart still beating, a life still holding on, a silence worth staying for. The second morning in the cave began without sunlight. There was only the slow unraveling of shadow as night pulled itself away from the stone walls like a reluctant guest. Miriam was already awake, though her body begged for more rest. Her eyes were dry, her mouth past thirsty. She hadn't slept so much as drifted, one eye always halfway open, listening for breath that wasn't hers. The lion was still alive. She could hear it, shallow, sandpapery inhalations, like wind dragging itself through a rusted pipe. The sound wasn't reassuring, but it was there. And at this point, that was enough. Miriam sat up carefully, wincing as her knees cracked beneath her. The air in the cave was thick and still. Her hand trembled as she reached into her bag. She had one bottle of water left, barely half full. She unscrewed it slowly, took a single sip, and pressed the cap back on tight. Then she opened the wax paper one more time. Only one cookie remained. It was crumbling at the edges. She picked it up, broke it in half again, and whispered to herself, "Old habits die hard." Her voice cracked, dry as ash. She placed one half near her side. The other she tossed gently toward the lion. It landed closer this time. The lion didn't move. For a moment, Miriam wondered if he was gone, that during the night some silent moment had carried him away. But then, almost imperceptibly, his eye opened again, just one, amber and glassy, with the haze of exhaustion fogging its core. He saw the cookie. Miriam waited. After several minutes, the lion stirred. Not a movement, just a twitch of the paw not caught in the snare. Then his tongue emerged, rasping over the cookie without pulling it in. Like yesterday, he tasted, but did not eat. Miriam felt something shift. A strange realization. The lion wasn't waiting for food. He was waiting for her. She took her own half, bit it slowly. The texture stuck to her tongue like chalk. She chewed, forcing her body to accept the motion. When she swallowed, she looked at the lion. Their eyes met. It was absurd. An old woman sharing breakfast with a lion in the middle of nowhere. There were no retirement plans, no life insurance, no 401k. Just two creatures clinging to moments, rationing breath. Miriam leaned back against the wall. Her hand brushed the rock, sharp, cracked, sun-warmed. She glanced at the wound around the lion's paw. The metal was cutting deeper. Infection was setting in. She didn't need to be a veterinarian to see that. Flies circled lazily, landing on the dark, drying blood. She whispered, "I'm sorry." He didn't move, but she knew he heard her. Outside, the wind shifted. A dry, scraping breeze carried with it the sound of the distant savannah waking up. A shriek, probably a hawk. A grunt from some unseen antelope. The brush of grass against fur as something moved where it didn't belong. Miriam pulled her scarf tighter, more out of habit than utility. She'd worn it. Every Sunday to church for 20 years. Her husband used to say it made her look like a movie star. That was a long time ago. Her eyes drifted back to the lion, the scar under his left eye, the way his mane curled like burnt wire, the tremor in his flank each time he breathed. This was a king reduced to a memory, but still a king. She shifted closer, just a foot. He didn't flinch. Another foot. Still nothing. Now she was just 3 feet away from him, close enough to smell the earth in his fur and the metallic tinge of his blood. Her hand hovered, then lowered slowly until her fingertips grazed a patch of clean fur near his shoulder. It was rough, sun-warmed, and trembling. The lion didn't pull away. Her hand rested there, as if anchoring both of them in place. Minutes passed. She whispered, "You don't want to die alone, do you?" The silence that followed was not empty. Somewhere beyond the hills, unseen, a drone buzzed faintly through the sky, a tourist vehicle, perhaps. But no one would spot a woman tucked inside a shadowed cave, and no one would look for her. Miriam took the final sip of her water. She closed the bottle slowly. Her lips were dry, her voice faint, but the words came out clear. "I won't leave you." The lion blinked once. Night approached again, this time slower. The colors in the sky melted from gold to from ash to bruised purple. Wind swept across the rocks like memory. Inside the cave, the 2 figures lay side by side, one curled against stone, the other sprawled in dust and pain. At some point after sunset, Miriam awoke to a sound, a rustle, then another, then breathing. Not the lion's. Something was sniffing at the cave entrance. The lion lifted his head slowly. His ears twitched. Then came the laugh, not human, not amused. A shrill, high-pitched cackle, like teeth chattering through bone. Hyenas. Miriam sat up. Her heart thudded. One yellow eye peeked around the edge of the cave's mouth, then another and another. They were circling, 4 of them, maybe 5, skinny, ravenous, dangerous, drawn by the smell of blood and weakness. The lion tried to stand. His leg buckled. He collapsed. The hyenas stepped closer. Miriam didn't think. She moved to the front of the cave, her arms wide, body trembling. She shouted, not words, just noise, sound, desperation, a scream with no vocabulary. The lead hyena stopped, then bared its teeth. That's when the lion stood. Somehow, impossibly, he pulled himself up. 3 legs, blood leaking, muscles shaking. He opened his mouth and roared. It wasn't the roar from television documentaries. It wasn't polished or proud. It was broken, ragged, ancient, the kind of sound the earth remembers. The hyenas froze. One stepped back, another whimpered. The lion dragged himself forward, placing his body between Miriam and the mouth of the cave, and waited. There was blood now, fresh, dripping from the reopened wound. But he didn't move. He just stood there, a silent wall of pain and defiance. Miriam couldn't breathe. After what felt like hours, the hyenas faded back into the brush. Their giggles turned to distant echoes. Silence returned. The lion collapsed. But he did not return to his corner. He stayed where he had fallen, his body now a barricade. Miriam crawled forward, tears streaming down her face. Her hand found his mane, and this time she didn't hesitate. She rested her head against his ribs. The heartbeat was slower now, but it was there. She closed her eyes and whispered, "You stayed." The stars came later that night, quiet and indifferent. They shimmered above the vast Ngorongoro sky like old secrets, cold and watchful. Miriam lay curled against the lion's side, her cheek pressed lightly to his ribcage. She could feel his heart beneath the fur, slow, steady, but more fragile than before. Each beat was a decision, each breath a rebellion. She didn't sleep. She listened. The cave, though now safe from the hyenas, still hummed with unspoken fears. The lion had not moved since collapsing at the mouth of the cave, his body forming a wall between her and the outside world. A wall built not of strength, but of will. He bled onto the dust, and the flies returned. But he didn't growl. He didn't flinch. He simply breathed, anchoring her to life. Miriam whispered into the darkness, "You don't even know me?" The lion's tail twitched. There had been a time not long ago when Miriam feared even her own reflection, when loneliness had crept into her bones like arthritis, slow and permanent. She had lived with a son who measured affection and obligation, who gave her birthdays and gas station cards, and talked over her like she was already gone. Her husband, Richard, had passed 13 years ago, colon cancer, quick and cruel. Now this beast of muscle and bone had done what her own blood would not. He had stood for her. She didn't know what that meant, only that it mattered. When the wind returned, it carried a bite. Miriam sat up slowly and took off her shawl. It was light, but enough. She draped it gently over the lion's flank. He didn't stir. She wondered if he even felt it. But something inside her insisted on the gesture, not as comfort, as gratitude. Hours passed. Dawn began not with color, but with temperature, the shift from cold silence to warm breath. The sky bled orange as the sun crept over the hills. Birds called out from dry trees. Somewhere, far off, an engine hummed, too distant to be real. Miriam stood, her knees protested, her joints ached with age and stillness. She looked at the lion. His eyes were closed again, chest rising, falling, but each time slower. She knew what that meant. He wouldn't last another night without water. Neither would she. She remembered something, a conversation. Weeks ago, her son, cold, impatient, had mentioned a small river near the edge of the park, dismissed it like a tourist stop, useless, unimportant. But now it was the only thing that might keep them both alive. She turned west. The cave's entrance blinked with harsh light. She shielded her eyes and stepped forward. Her throat burned. Her lips cracked when she licked them. But she walked anyway, 10 steps forward, then paused. Behind her, the lion groaned. She turned. He was watching her. She pointed, slowly, clearly, toward the horizon, toward survival. He didn't understand the gesture, but he understood her body, her intention, her pause. She started walking, again. When she glanced back, he was following, not beside her, not close, but enough. He dragged his leg. Blood marked the ground in intermittent dots. His head hung low. But he followed. For 2 hours they moved together across the land. She would walk, then stop. He would catch up, pausing to rest. Then they would move again, like old dancers who had never met but somehow shared the same song. When they found the river, it wasn't much, just a silver trickle between stones, shallow, quiet. But the water was clear and it moved. Miriam dropped to her knees, her hands shaking. She drank until her body remembered how to feel again. Cold and clean, not filtered, not purified, but alive. She turned. The lion stood 5 meters away, watching, panting. He did not approach. Of course he didn't. She realized what drinking meant for him. To lower his head was to expose his throat. To expose his throat was to risk death. Even now, broken and bleeding, instinct ruled. Miriam cupped water in her hands. She stood, walked slowly, 1 step, then another. The lion did not move. She stopped 1 meter from him, held out her hands. Water dripped between her fingers. The lion stared. Then, like a whisper, he lowered his head. He drank. From her hands, his tongue was coarse, warm. The sensation startled her, but she didn't pull away. In that moment, something shifted again. The roles reversed once more. Not prey and predator, not old woman and wild beast. Just 2 survivors, 2 souls. When he finished, he looked up at her. Their faces were inches apart. She whispered, "Thank you." Behind them, unseen among the distant shrubs, another pair of eyes watched. A boy, no older than 12. Barefoot, thin, skin darkened by sun and wind. His name was Jabari. He had seen them from afar, an old woman giving water to a lion. He didn't speak. He didn't blink. He just stared, wide-eyed. And then he ran. Not away, but toward the only place he trusted, the ranger outpost, a mile south of the park boundary. He had news, unbelievable news, a lion, injured, alive, and a woman who shouldn't be. Jabari's feet kicked up dust as he sprinted through thorny brush. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with something else, something that felt like hope, or maybe wonder, because what he had seen didn't make sense, but it was real. Back at the river, Miriam sat beside the lion. She rested her hand on his shoulder, not to comfort him, but to ground herself. She had left her son. He had left his pride. But in this place, in this impossibility, they had found each other, and neither was alone anymore. The wind changed that afternoon. It rolled low across the Ngorongoro Basin, stirring thin trails of dust behind Miriam's feet as she walked beside the lion. The sky was too quiet. Even the birds, once so eager to fill the air with song, had gone still. The river had given them something precious, a temporary relief. But Miriam knew better than to trust such moments. Water might buy time, but it didn't heal wounds or untangle traps. The lion's leg was worse. The snare had dug in deeper, swelling the joint. Infection had set in. His movements were slow, his breaths ragged. They needed help. Miriam had no phone, no way to call anyone. But the lion had a collar, a dull, dusty thing pressed against his mane, blinking faintly with a red light. GPS tracking, she guessed. Maybe someone was watching. Maybe someone had noticed he'd gone still. Or maybe no one was looking. She sat beside him beneath the twisted limbs of an acacia tree, the shade a weak shield against the afternoon heat. Her body was trembling with fatigue, but she didn't rest. Not really. She watched the horizon, and somewhere, several kilometers away, a boy was running. Jabari had never seen anything like it. He ran barefoot, faster than he ever had before, his thin legs cutting through tall grass and thorny underbrush. His chest burned, but he didn't stop, not when a thorn caught his foot, not when a vulture overhead shadowed his path. He ran because what he had seen defied every story he had ever been told. He reached the ranger post by late afternoon. The place was quiet, only 2 trucks in the lot, a windmill creaking softly, solar panels catching what light remained. Jabari burst through the gate, breathless. "They're by the river," he gasped. "The lion, and an old woman. She gave him water, with her hands." The ranger on duty blinked at him, confused. Then the boy pointed at the map on the wall. Here, he had a collar, red blinking light. That changed everything. Within minutes, radios buzzed. A call went out to the regional vets unit. A name was mentioned, David Oyang, the senior wildlife veterinarian responsible for collaring every adult lion in the region. David heard the transmission while refueling at a supply station. He had been looking for a missing lion for 3 days, one they'd nicknamed Keto, a dominant male from the Northern Pride. He was known for his aggression, his strength, his defiance of territory lines. He was not known for gentleness. David checked the GPS log. The collar had indeed moved, for the first time in 72 hours. And it wasn't alone. There was something else, a heat signature, human-sized, moving with him. David stared at the screen. "That's impossible," he said out loud, but he turned the ignition anyway. By nightfall, Miriam and the lion were resting again in the same cave from before. The river had refreshed them, but the journey back had cost them. The lion had collapsed twice. Miriam had nearly fainted, but they had made it. She thought of that small victory like a debt, something she now owed him. She would stay. She would not abandon him. She had seen what abandonment looked like. The cave was quieter than the night before. No hyenas, no vultures, just the slow exhale of dust settling into darkness. That was when the sound came. Not footsteps, tires, a rumble, low, distant, but familiar. She rose to her feet slowly, knees buckling beneath her. The lion lifted his head too, but barely. Then lights. 2 beams pierced through the bush. A vehicle. Miriam stepped forward, shading her eyes. The engine slowed, stopped. Then a voice, male, confused, cautious. "Ma'am? Are you okay?" Miriam didn't move. The door opened. A man stepped out. Tall, lean, late 40s. Dust on his boots. A radio clipped to his vest. He looked from her to the lion, then back again. That's a wild lion," he said carefully. "You shouldn't be alive." Miriam's voice came slow but steady. "I shouldn't be," but he decided otherwise. David Oyang froze. This wasn't just a wounded animal. This wasn't just a lost woman. This was something else. He approached slowly, cautiously, his eyes on the lion. Keto growled, low and dangerous. His body, though weak, shifted to block Miriam. David stopped. He raised both hands in peace. "I'm here to help," he said gently. Miriam knelt beside the lion, her hand brushing his mane. "He doesn't like people," she said. David laughed nervously. "Clearly," he replied. The lion's eyes locked on him, unblinking. "I've been looking for him for days," David said. "He's important to the reserve. He's the Pride Alpha." Miriam didn't look up. She just kept her hand on the lion's neck. "He has a name," she whispered. "Simba." David blinked. "You named him?" "He named himself," she said. David made a note in his field book, then paused. "You can't stay here, ma'am. It's not safe, and he needs real help." Miriam stood. "I won't leave him." David hesitated. He looked at the lion again. The beast was watching him, as if weighing his soul. "You don't have to," he said finally, "but we'll need time." He radioed back to base, called in for a mobile vet team. Tranquilizers, supplies, a trailer. The sun dipped below the horizon as the preparations began. From a distance, Jabari watched from the brush, eyes wide. He saw the lion, the woman, and the man working silently under fading light. He didn't come closer, but he didn't leave. He wanted to know how it would end. And so did the world. That night, as the stars returned to their posts, the lion slept with his head resting on Miriam's lap. She ran her fingers through his mane, not gently, not delicately, but with a kind of reverence reserved for old warriors. "You did good," she whispered. No one had ever said that to her son, and no one had ever said it to the lion, but tonight someone needed to hear it. The wind shifted just before sunrise, carrying with it something sour. Not the natural scent of dust or dung or blood, but something human, metallic, intentional. Miriam woke with a start, her hand still resting on the lion's mane. His eyes were already open. He was listening. David had left before dawn, driving back to the station to bring the medical team. He had promised to return within hours with everything they needed to get Simba to safety. But out here, promises took time to keep. And time was running thin. Miriam stood slowly, her legs stiff, her throat dry. She looked westward, toward the ridgeline, and saw movement. 3 men, not rangers. Their silhouettes cut through the brush like knives. They moved low, fast, with practiced silence, rifles strapped to their backs. One carried a long blade. Another had a pack slung over his shoulder, heavy, dragging. They weren't here to help. They weren't here for her. They were here for the lion. Poachers. Simba didn't growl. He didn't charge. He just rose slowly, with the elegance of something ancient. His leg trembled beneath him, the snare still cinched around raw flesh. Blood had dried along his flank like ink, but his head was high, his body squared. Miriam stepped forward, placing herself between them. The men paused. One laughed. "She's serious," he said in Swahili. "She's guarding it." Another raised his rifle. "No need to waste ammo," the third said. "She's old. She'll move." Miriam didn't move. She stared at them, her face pale, lips cracked, but eyes steady. "You'll have to go through me," she said. Her voice didn't shake. The man with the rifle lowered the barrel toward her. His finger hovered near the trigger. That was when Simba roared. It wasn't like before. This roar didn't belong in the modern world. It didn't belong in wildlife documentaries or nature preserves. It belonged in the stories passed down by firelight, the ones where gods wore the shape of animals and walked beside kings. The sound tore through the valley. Even the earth seemed to flinch. The men froze. The man with the rifle staggered, his hand slipping. He caught himself, cursing, but then the sky answered, not with thunder, with a blade. A low vibration cut the air, then a shadow. A Kenya Wildlife Service helicopter crested over the hills, its rotors slicing the morning quiet. It moved fast, descending like a bird of prey. Dust kicked up in great swirling sheets. The men turned. One ran. Another hesitated. Too late. Rangers burst from the brush, rifles raised, voices loud and unyielding. The poachers scattered, but the perimeter had been sealed. Two were tackled and pinned. The third disappeared into the bush, swallowed by thorns and dust. Miriam didn't look away until the helicopter landed. David stepped out, shielded his eyes, and ran toward her. She was still standing in front of the lion. "He's here," she said. "You said you'd come." "I did," David replied, his breath caught between disbelief and urgency. "But I didn't expect you'd hold them off yourself." She smiled faintly. He helped. David turned to look at Simba. The lion had collapsed again, his body spent. His eyes were open but unfocused. A low groan rattled from his throat. The vet team moved quickly, prepping tranquilizers, gauze, surgical tools. They approached carefully, circling around Miriam like she was part of the animal now, not separate. A woman stepped forward, tall, with braided hair and sharp eyes. Dr. Amara Okonkwo, behavioral ethologist from Nairobi. She had studied lions for 23 years, but she'd never seen anything like this. "No hissing, no retreat posture, no sign of stress," she muttered, scribbling in her field notes. "He accepts her presence like pride proximity, as if she's one of his own." David knelt beside Simba, needle in hand. "He's ready," he said. Miriam leaned down. She cupped Simba's face gently between her palms. His eyes fluttered, almost closed. "They'll find you a safe place," she whispered. "Somewhere no one will hurt you again. I promise." The needle slid into his side. Within seconds, he was asleep. The trailer was rolled in behind the Land Cruiser. A stretcher was lowered, then raised. Simba's body moved only slightly as he was lifted, his ribs visible beneath the fur, his paw still tangled in wire. The team worked quickly, removing the snare with practiced hands. The wound was deep, festering, but treatable. Miriam stayed back as they loaded him into the trailer. Her shawl blew slightly in the morning wind, lifting like a flag above silence. David returned to her side. "We can take you in now," he said gently. "You need rest, water, medical attention." She nodded, but didn't move. "I'll follow him," she said. "Wherever you take him." David hesitated, then nodded. "Then we go together." The drive back took hours. They didn't speak much. The lion lay in the trailer behind them, sedated, monitored, alive. The roads were rough, but Miriam didn't mind. She watched the land pass by, the trees, the shadows, the stones, and she thought about the moment the rifle had pointed at her chest, about the roar that followed. She'd never known protection like that, not from her son, not even from her late husband, not like that. She had looked death in the eye, and behind her, death had found something older, something louder, a lion who had nothing left to give, but gave anyway. for her. At the reserve, Simba was moved into a rehabilitation enclosure, cool, shaded, silent. Miriam was given a bed nearby, just a cot, a wash basin, some tea. But it was enough. That night, as the stars returned to their rightful places, the lion slept under a roof for the first time. And Miriam, for the first time in years, slept without fear. Not because of walls, but because of what had stood before her. When the world had come with knives and guns, he stood. The days that followed passed not with chaos, but with quiet. Simba lay in the shaded enclosure behind the reserve's main station, his body stretched along the packed earth like a forgotten statue. The wound on his hind leg had been cleaned, the snare removed, the tissue disinfected and stitched. A slow-release antibiotic pulsed through his system, pushing back the infection that had nearly claimed him. His breathing steadied, but his eyes remained watchful, never frantic, never wild, only steady, always searching for one thing. Miriam. She had been given a cot in the rangers' quarters, a space meant for short-term visitors or volunteers. It had a ceiling fan, a kettle, a chair. For her, it was luxury. The nurses checked in twice a day. She accepted their tea with a soft thank you, always polite, always distant. But her attention never left the window, the one that looked out over the enclosure. He was there, not just in body, but in posture, in presence. The first day, he wouldn't let anyone near him. Not David, not Amara, not the vet techs with soft voices and gentle hands. Every time someone approached the fence, Simba would rise, not to lunge, but to shift between them and the spot where Miriam stood, a barrier, still guarding. "I've never seen this," Amara whispered to David. "He's imprinting." David nodded. Not on instinct, on choice. They decided to try something new. Each morning, Miriam was given the chance to walk the perimeter, not inside the enclosure, just near it. She would stand 5 feet from the fence. Simba would rise, limp toward her, and sit, his massive body settling into the dirt like a boulder beside the boundary. They would stay like that for an hour. No one spoke, no one interrupted. Then she'd leave, and he would watch her go. On the third day, something changed. As Miriam turned to return to her room, Simba rose and walked with her, not inside the fence, of course, but along the edge, pacing beside her every step, like a shadow. When she stopped, he stopped. When she moved, he moved. The entire staff gathered to watch. Jabari had returned too, hovering at the edge of the reserve with a ranger assigned to him. He had become somewhat of a symbol, a child who had seen the impossible and carried the story. He watched silently, arms folded across his chest. On the 5th day, Miriam brought her chair closer. Still outside the fence, still safe. Simba didn't growl. He approached and lowered his head until his nose pressed gently against the chain links. Miriam did the same. Their foreheads met through steel. There was no sound, just breathing, just being. That night, Amara wrote in her journal, "The bond between this lion and the woman transcends every known behavioral framework. We've seen instances of animal-human attachment in controlled environments. Never in the wild. Never like this. She is not just familiar. She is family." David read the entry, closed the book, and made a decision. He approached Miriam the next morning as she sat in her usual chair, watching Simba soak in the sun like an old warrior preparing for another battle. "It's time," he said. Miriam turned. "We can't keep him here forever," David continued. "He's strong enough to travel. The wound's healing. He needs space, territory, a chance to return to the wild." Miriam nodded. "But it has to be his choice." David hesitated. "There's a sanctuary, remote, protected, no poachers, no tourists, no fences. But we can't drug him again, not if we want to preserve the bond. We need him to walk onto the trailer himself." Miriam smiled. Then I'll ask him. The entire reserve went quiet that afternoon. A ramp was built leading into a specially outfitted transport trailer. Wide, padded, dark enough to mimic the comfort of a den. Hay spread on the floor. Vets waited nearby, equipment ready in case the plan failed. Miriam walked out first. She didn't speak. She didn't coax. She simply turned, looked back at Simba, and took a step onto the ramp. Simba hesitated. Then he rose. The staff held their breath. Step by step, Simba approached. He sniffed the edge of the ramp, tasted the metal, watched Miriam. And then he followed. Every inch of the ramp groaned beneath his weight. Dust lifted behind him. Miriam walked slowly, never looking back. Simba followed, his 3 working legs steady, the injured one trembling but bearing just enough. When she reached the trailer, she turned. He was beside her. Their eyes met. Then, together, they entered. David closed the trailer door softly. There was no applause, no cheers. Just silence. Because everyone watching knew something sacred had happened. Something that didn't belong to headlines or hashtags or high-traffic blog articles on animal rescue. It belonged to them. That night, as the truck disappeared down the dirt road, carrying a lion and an old woman toward a new beginning, Jabari stood at the edge of the ranger station, his hands in his pockets. "Will they be okay?" he asked quietly. David looked out over the horizon. "I think they already are." Inside the trailer, the engine hummed. Miriam leaned against the wall, her body swaying with each bump in the road. Simba's head rested near her knee. She reached down and stroked his mane. Not gently, but with gratitude. There are moments in life that no insurance policy, no life savings, no financial planning can prepare you for. The kind that show up unannounced, brutal and beautiful, wrapped in dust and teeth. This was one of them, and they had survived it. 3 years passed like a whispered story, the kind that begins in disbelief and ends in silence, because no one knows how to talk about things that defy the world we think we understand. David Oyang sat at his desk near the window, the late afternoon sun draped in slanted ribbons across the papers on his table. The Ngorongoro Basin stretched beyond the glass, still vast, still wild, still refusing to be tamed. A mug of lukewarm tea sat beside him. His inbox was full, his phone buzzing with reminders, but he hadn't moved for 10 minutes. He was reading a letter, handwritten, folded with care. The envelope was postmarked from a care facility in Nairobi. The handwriting was small, steady despite its age. The return address was a simple name. Just Miriam. David read it again. "Dear Doctor, I hope this finds you well. I know you don't believe in fairy tales. You never said it, but I saw it in your eyes. That scientific caution, that gentle distance, and I respect it. But some stories, some real painful dust-covered stories, are closer to fairy tales than we admit. My son came to see me last month, first time in 3 years. I wasn't surprised. He heard about the video. The one someone took of Simba walking onto the trailer beside me. He didn't ask if I was well. He asked if there was money. I told him no. I told him I had already given everything I had to someone who protected me with nothing but broken legs and old eyes. He didn't understand. He left before tea. But that's not why I'm writing. They told me Simba is doing well." David paused, eyes still, then read on. "They say he has a pride now. 3 females, 2 cubs. The little ones chase insects and sleep under his chest like the world is made of soft stone. They say he still limps sometimes, but he walks like it doesn't matter. And he grooms the cubs with that same careful gentleness he once offered me when I thought I was invisible. I gave him a name. Simba. I know it's silly, but I never had another son, at least not one who looked back when I spoke. The nurses here are kind. They bring me ginger tea in the mornings and let me sit in the sun for as long as I like. But every night, Before I sleep, I close my eyes and return to that cave. I feel the heartbeat under my hand, the warm breath against my neck, the silence that said, without needing to say, "You are not alone. I'm not afraid of dying anymore, Doctor, because I think part of me already lives out there. Thank you for saving him, for saving us both." Yours, Miriam. David folded the letter slowly. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the savannah. Outside, cicadas buzzed. A secretary bird stalked something in the distance. Somewhere beyond the visible line of trees, a roar rolled up from the red hills. Not near, but not far. It came from the northern edge of the Opeta Sanctuary, a stretch of protected land far from roads or tourists, where only researchers and rangers were permitted, and only by foot. A lion's call, deep, measured, resonant. David stood from his chair and walked to the window. He couldn't see the source, but he didn't need to. The sound was unmistakable. It wasn't a territorial warning. It wasn't a mating call. It was something else. A check-in, a declaration, a memory. In the sanctuary, miles away, a lion with a faded scar along his hind leg stood on a rise above the brush. His mane had thickened again, darker now, streaked with years. Beside him, two cubs tumbled across the grass, clawing at one another's tails. The adult females rested nearby, bellies full, eyes half-lidded in lazy contentment. The lion raised his head to the wind. He listened. Then he roared again. A single call. It echoed across the hills, down the valleys, bouncing off stones and trees and bones long buried. And somewhere, far from there, a woman in a small bed beneath a wide Nairobi window stirred in her sleep and smiled. In her dream, she was not 80. She was not alone. She stood beside the river again, the cool water rushing past her hands. Her fingers cupped gently, trembling with effort, offering something no one else could give. And he was there, still limping, still fierce, still choosing her. Some bonds don't come from blood. Some are forged in fear, in survival. In a single moment when two lives say to each other, "If we must go, let's not go alone." This was not a rescue story. It was a story about being seen, and being seen, truly seen, by something wild. That was more than survival. That was love.